In 2022, we got some interesting news regarding Syphon Filter. It seemed that in some way it was actually coming back, and while it didn't look like a new game, it at least would be back in the public space for historical fans to enjoy, with the potential for a new audience to find it as well. This all seemed linked to Sony's revamped PS Plus service. Before, it was all a one-option service, but now it would feature tiers and elements of PS Now would be folded into it. At the highest tier, the players would have access to Sony's classic catalog, which would feature games from the PS1, PS2, and even the PSP. To this day, I still don't think the premium tier is worth getting, especially since Sony is very slow to add new games to it. But for many of these titles, you can opt to just buy them outright, which is a good option to have for someone like me who doesn't want to pay for the subscription. So on the initial list of Syphon titles, it seems like 1, 2, Dark Mirror, and Logan Shadow were all rated again on the PS4 and 5. While not part of that leak, it was nice to see 3 eventually make its way to modern audiences as well. So far, the Omega strain seems to be missing from all of this, and I hope that it does come back in some form. It honestly could benefit from a remaster treatment. But today we are a bit more focused on Dark Mirror, as this was the first Syphon Filter game on the PSP and one of the launch titles, so there was a lot of pressure on it to show what this handheld could do. Dark Mirror is a really fun game, and when seen on its launch hardware, this portable title is exceptional, considering what the developers had to work with. Dark Mirror works within its limitations to show the potential of the system, and could confidently deliver something of console quality in the palm of your hand. So let's take some time and talk about Dark Mirror. Let's give some background and set the stage for Dark Mirror. The first Syphon Filter game was a bit of a redemption story for Eidetic, that would later be known as Bend Studios. Their Bubsy 3D was a financial and commercial flop, but their efforts with Syphon Filter very much proved that they could make memorable titles. Syphon 1 delivered a fun spy story, great soundtrack, and compelling gameplay along with its level design. There were many options when it came to the action, from using the cinematic target lock to be able to aim in first person while leaning around corners. It blended stealth and action very well, along with providing some interesting puzzles and situations to solve. Much of this stuff holds up well today, and shows how the developer can create situations that allows for the player to figure it out, and then as a result feel like a spy. Syphon 1 was a huge hit for the studio, and a sequel was worked on very quickly after. Many consider the second the best entry in the series. It amplified the amount of situations that the player could play through, along with the fun puzzle-solving parts. It's like they grabbed all the fun situations that you would find in action films, but now the player was a part of them. For the next title, Ben was aiming to go for something very ambitious. They wanted to create a sort of Syphon Filter online co-op experience. This would be the third entry and be a PS2 exclusive, but Sony had other plans. At the time, the PS2 was very new, and many of the PS1 players had not fully switched over, so there was still a lot of PS1 players. As a result, Sony wanted Ben to make one more Syphon game for the PS1, and this would be known as Syphon Filter 3. This game does have its fair share of flaws, and is seen as the weakest entry on the PS1. Many of the criticisms are justified, but considering that this was a less than ideal development, and a project that was more of an order by Sony, I honestly think Ben did a good job with it. Plus, the minigame mode that adds hours of replay does not get enough love. Naturally after this, Ben worked on what would have been Ben's original Syphon Filter 3, with the Omega strain. For the time, this was very ambitious, especially within the console space, a primary online-focused experience, and while there is a lot to like about this title, it did not do well critically, but more importantly, commercially. It did have its own share of developmental troubles as well, with Sony mandating that there be a single-player option very late into development. Following this, Ben shifted their attention towards the portable space. Sony was making their first handheld, and Ben wanted to make a console experience that the player could have in the palm of their hand. The PS2 was even used for much of the early prototyping, but there was a hardware flaw that the developers had to work around. The PSP only had one left analog nub, so you could not make traditional shooter controls using a 2-stick system. This is where the team got creative on providing a few different control options so the player could use one that fit their style. As a result, target lock would be returning, and there was even an option to control the camera and aim with the face buttons. Old and new toys would also be seen as well. And based on the final product, Dark Mirror was and is awesome. It's one of those rare launch titles that stood as one of the best games on the PSP for the entire run. Dark Mirror is a great PSP game and honestly one of my favorites on the handheld. It was the first title I played on it, and it definitely set a strong impression for the entire system's run. When it comes to the gameplay, it's a nice mix of older Syphon with more modern design and mechanics. For example, I really like that target lock is back in some form, but there are also free aim options with over-the-shoulder camera as being one of those that you can choose. While the roll is missing here, along with the damage meter, a cover system is added in. This operates by having you just press up against a wall. It can be a bit hit and miss, but it is a nice option. The action in this is more of a stop and pop nature. The weapons are really fun to use, and I like the options you are provided. For many of the guns, you can change how they fire if you want to go full auto or use a single shot. The taser does make a return, and it's very awesome to see it back. The new sniper rifle is probably one of my favorite new toys. This comes supplied with different ammo types and is always fun to use. You have everything from a shock dart, gas attachment, and explosive rounds. Dark Mirror is much more straightforward than any of the prior entries. Each level is an enjoyable piece of bite-sized action, with some offering more room to maneuver in. The action is focused and consistently fun. It's a brisk game that works well just playing a few levels at a time or in larger chunks. Graphically, it holds up well and has some really good cutscenes too. When looking back on this, Ben really pulled off something great with Dark Mirror. Sony was going into uncharted territory with this handheld, and it really needed to come out of the gate with at least a few stellar titles. It may have some more streamlined elements than the prior games, but you gotta commend Ben for what they pulled off here. Dark Mirror is clearly a very good third-person shooter, and then when you place it into the portable space, I would say it's exceptional considering what it's trying to do. But there are a few things that I miss that are staples of the Syphon series, that were lost in making this portable game. I am happy to see a form of the target lock in this game, but the manual rolling is not available here. You might roll when dropping up high, but there is no button dedicated for this. This might even come back to the hardware issues of the PSP. There's different control options and the face buttons can be used to control the camera. When the face buttons are used for the camera movements, it really restricts what actions a character can make. Based on the execution, it is obvious that Ben was trying to get the most out of this handheld, and it also showed that because of the hardware limitations, some things were probably going to give a bit, and I think being able to roll definitely factored into the combat as a big one, and probably why Dark Mirror takes on more of a stop and pop nature to its design. So I do miss it, and at the same time I understand why the roll isn't here. A bigger departure is how the level design is constructed for Dark Mirror. Again, I have positives about this. Levels are generally short, enjoyable chunks of gameplay, and while this might seem a bit choppy when playing it through in one long session, you have to remember that the game was designed for a handheld. That way you can drop in, complete a level or two, and then easily come back to it later. But one Syphon Filter staple I very much miss in this title are the puzzle-solving parts that were pretty dominant in the first and second games. For some, Dark Mirror was their introduction to the series. For others, there were returning fans. If you played the PS1 titles, you'll know what I'm referring to. In many cases, Dark Mirror takes on a more modern design, where it's usually very clear what your objectives are and you never really get stuck in one place for too long. Even parts that might seem like small puzzles are provided to you with your wind goggles that sort of provide you with your answer. While I do think this design was probably done to make a great portable game, I very much miss the figuring it out sections of the originals. Syphon Filter very much knew how to set up a problem, not provide an obvious solution, lay out some clues, and even enough space for the player to figure it out. This might cause some head scratching at times, but it meant that those moments stayed with the player. It was extremely smart design because it wouldn't spoon feed you, but rather just give you room to solve it for yourself and come to your own conclusions, and the end result was making the player feel smart for the puzzle-solving parts. These were spy movie moments that effectively put the player in those parts. I do understand that this sort of stuff would have probably been harder to accomplish with the limited hardware of the PSP, but at the same time, this type of design is honestly what makes the PS1 Syphons feel like a breath of fresh air, even today. Dark Mirror is a solid third-person cover shooter and an exceptional PSP game. If you have never played this, it's definitely worth trying. And try to remember that this was pulled off on a PSP with limited hardware. This was also only the beginning when it came to Ben's ventures into the portable space. They were the kings of the PSP for much of it, as they made 2 Syphon titles and a portable version of Resistance, and all 3 were very well received. With the trophies being leaked for Dark Mirror, it's only a matter of time until we get to see this on the PS4 and 5. And I hope that it comes with some of the options that the Vita had, where you could tweak some of the controls, since now you'll be playing on hardware with 2 thumbsticks. Have you played Dark Mirror? What are your thoughts on it? And let me know in the comments below. If you're interested in being notified of new videos, please hit the subscribe button and bell. And if you would like to support the channel and get early access to content, please check out my Patreon. All of the links will be at the end of this video and within the description, and thank you very much for watching.